According to Department of Employment figures, there are about 2.8 million disabled people in the labour market today. According to disability sources, there are more likely to be at least 6 million. The difference between these figures can partly be explained by the number of people with so-called hidden disabilities. Under the new Disability Discrimination Act, workers who don't declare their impairments to employers at the first opportunity could risk losing their rights to protection from discrimination in the future. So why do people hide impairments? Why don't they just come out?
No, you're being too emotional. No.
Why was he upset?
Every time I see an application form and it says, are you a disabled person? You then have to think, if I put yes, I'm not going to get the job, because immediately they see disability as illness, as long-term absence. This person's going to be a problem. We're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to do this. And, you know, the Disability Discrimination Act, the new act that's come in, doesn't do anything to help that, because it allows for justifiable discrimination in companies that can't afford to make reasonable adjustments. What on earth are reasonable adjustments?
I didn't actually declare that I was disabled, although I was well aware that I was disabled when I applied for the job I had 4 years ago, because I thought that I wouldn't get it. I thought that my employer wouldn't employ me if he felt I was a disabled person. Very quickly, though, it became apparent within the office that I was a disabled person. And he pointed out to me, in a friendly way, I have to say, that as I hadn't declared it at my interview, I could be dismissed.
Surveys in the last 10 years have consistently shown that nearly 40% of employers do discriminate against job applicants who come out about their disabilities. So if you want a job, or you want to keep the one you've got, maybe it's just sensible to hide your impairment if you can.
It's impossible to give hard and fast advice about whether or not you should come out as disabled at work. In some workplaces, you're not going to face any discrimination, and people can work that out for themselves. In those circumstances, it's a really important positive step. In other situations, where you know that you're going to face, either not getting promoted or perhaps even losing your job, then obviously now is not the time.
At the end of the day, I lost my job, or was sacked from my job for doing something which I needed to do because I couldn't see. I didn't fight this because I was mentally sick by that time, and I didn't fight it, and I still then didn't want to come out and tell people that I could no longer manage anymore. I still thought I was going to go out and get another job,
When you've got a progressive condition or a progressive disability, you have a tendency with the people that you're coming out to that they tend to think that's affected their intelligence instantly. Yeah. And they don't realise that your brain think get affected by it, or in most cases they don't. So they actually start sort of slipping things away from you, don't they? Yeah. And you get in situations where something you used to do, which was your priority job, is suddenly being done by somebody else. And you think they've done you a really big favour because they've taken it away.
Sometimes you're treated as though you're slightly stupid. You shouldn't be doing this, that or the other. And well, of course, you know that.
I know.
And have learned to live, not usually within those limits.
I know,
and
I
could read books on the subject themselves. That's right.
Especially with somebody else in the car.
Some of the remarks that the people who try to portray themselves as being intelligent say in an interview room really defy belief sometimes. Yeah. And say, well, you can't do this job. You can't be a train driver.
But I wonder if I was aware, as aware now, then, and possibly the same with you, whether I would have stood my ground more firmly. But you've got so much going on emotionally and every other way that you have to withdraw sometimes, don't you?
Yes,
Start
you
again.
do. Start again.
Which is what I actually did.
That's a really good point, because at the time when I think you feel weak and very unsure and very troubled is the most important time of your life to be so bloody assertive and really assertive. And I just didn't have that.
But you don't,
because it was a constant
service
struggle.
that gives you that personal development skill or whatever that you've lost. And no matter how confident you actually are as a person or a personality pre-disability, when you have a disability, the confidence will not be at that level. I don't believe that you have to run around saying to everybody I'm deaf or I have epilepsy or whatever. But I think at some point in contact with people that you're working with, you have to say that you have a disability. And I think just as you're saying to me, you don't have to go into enormous details. If the person wants to know something, you have to make yourself approachable to question and get them, and make them feel confident about asking you questions. But I think the thing to keep it secret is actually wrong, very, very wrong. And I think long term, having worked in both situations, it just creates so many difficulties for you, and you have to become so devious to keep ahead of yourself and to keep on top that it just wears you out.
If we're going to be protected by the Disability Discrimination Act, we have no choice but to come out. So does it offer enough protection to justify the risk? One inducement the Act does offer is that employers will have to make reasonable adjustments in the workplace for their disabled workers. It's far from clear what reasonable will mean in practice, but the Act should force all employers to do what the best are already doing.
What if I actually didn't answer that question? Do you have a disability on the form? Can they get me later? I think most tribunals, even though this area isn't clear in the law, would be sympathetic towards someone who felt that disclosure of their disability was irrelevant, could prejudice an employer against them, and that actually had nothing to do with their capacity to do the job.
Well, certainly the Disability Discrimination Act does not protect people who don't declare, certainly at the job application stage, that they're a disabled person. And in some circumstances, that could be taken to be lying to the employer, which is a disciplinary offence.
Employers' attitudes are the same as anyone else's. If you ask yourself why it took so long to get this legislation through, it's because the attitudes held in the House of Commons, in the press, on the street, are very much the same set of attitudes which tends to assume that disability is best managed as some kind of charitable endeavour.
My experience of, since I sort of decided to declare myself as a disabled person, if you like, has been a very positive one for me, because before that time I think I was in limbo. I was still trying to prove that I didn't have the disabilities that I had, and to actually sit down and say to myself, right, you know, I am disabled, has taken me a lot further forward.
But there must be a way where we can contribute in a working environment, and that one day employers will see that there are constraints, that we still have enormous amount of skills and all of the other things, but it's that oppression, and I don't know how we move on from that. And I think by being a member of a coalition group or any support group for disabled people, it makes us stronger. Well, it's made me stronger. And it makes me feel more like fighting. And that assertiveness that I didn't have coming out, I feel that I have now.
With the election looming, many people are already looking beyond the Disability Discrimination Act for the sort of positive legislation that will reassure people about coming out at work. It's uncertain whether a Labour government would repeal the Act and bring in full civil rights legislation. But whatever legislation achieves, people with hidden disabilities will still have a lot to think about before they decide whether to come out or not.
what we should be looking at is a legislation that is written by us, and we are given an active input into the legislation, and we get an act that not only is enforceable, but an act that actually deals with the issues that aren't included in the current act, and gives us the civil rights that we want.
There's an awful lot of time and energy spent and wasted, and when you actually do come out, you can use that in a much, much more positive way, not only for yourself, but for issues, local issues, national issues. And the only way we can go is forward. When prior to that stage of actually coming out, making people aware of your disability, you're using endless resources, endless energy in just keeping yourself going every day and keeping this big, big secret. And it just gets you nowhere, it just wears you out. So get on with it.